is your Classic Metal Show right here on theclassicmetalshow.com. That is brand new stuff from Little Caesar. The name of that tune was 21 again. The name of the album is 8. And the guy that I guess has all the numbers on his side, it is the vocalist of Little Caesar. It is Ron Young. Ron, how are you, man?
I'm good, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Sure, man. Well, dude, I got to say, it is always a good time when there's new Little Caesar music. Not that that happens as much as a lot of us would like, but it is certainly cool to have a brand new record that absolutely kicks ass, man. So great job,
well,
and
thank you, man.
Good to have you back.
It's nice to be back. Yeah, frequency aside, we're having a great time. You know, it's one of those things that you realize how fast time goes when someone goes, you haven't put out a record in X number of years, and it's like, wow, has it really been that long? And yes, it has. But yeah, it's great to get some new blood out there and have a new record, and it's all exciting, and we're just having a great time of it all.
Sure. Now let's talk about that little bit of time between American Dream and now. I mean, I know you guys you've been out there and you've been playing shows, but I guess maybe that's just the place to start is where has Little Caesar been and what's been going on between then and now?
Yeah, well, every year we go out and do a run or two, over to Europe or the Kingdom, and we do some local shows, or we go out and do some runs with last summer we did a run with our buddies in Junkyard. They're old-time friends, and it made for a great double bill. And, we've had this situation where we've had this rotating guitar player for a number of years, and we just couldn't find the right guy. I was determined to not make a record until we were 5 guys. I've always believed that a band is a really sacred thing. It's important to me to have 5 participating members creatively and musically. And, we had these guys that were great, and they were like family guys, but they were so busy doing other bands and projects that we just couldn't really sit down and get into that sort of creative process of writing songs. And, it's not glamorous. It's not very commercially productive to sit down and do that work. And it was really hard to find the 5th guy that would, be that 5th member. So when we met Mark Tremalia, who's now in the band, and he just fits in perfectly, musically and personally and everything, I knew it was time to really sit down and put our nose to the grindstone and finish off these songs and get them ready to record.
Okay.
So that's what we did. And in the meantime, we put out a double live album from one of the tours we did. And the next thing you know, it's like a bunch of years go by. So
right.
It's just kind of interesting that life turns out that way. And I don't know if as you get older, it's more pronounced. I don't know. But that's just the way it is.
No doubt, man. Now, from listening to the new record, which is just titled 8, it's, in one sense, it's a somewhat typical Little Caesar record. In another sense, it's a lot more, I would say it's a lot more up than you guys are. I mean, not that you guys are a negative band by any means, but it's
no, totally. I don't disagree with that, and I appreciate that observation. It just wound up being that way. We were just kind of really in an up-tempo mood. One of the things about Little Caesar, we always more of a mid-tempo rocker kind of band, ballad-oriented band, melodic band. And this record's got a lot of peppy, up-tempo tracks on it, which is not typically our kind of thing.
Sure. And
it's just kind of the way it turned out. We did a cover of that Merle Haggard song, which is real up-tempo, Mama Tried.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just, I don't know, that's just kind of what was coming out of us, I think sonically, as you say, it's a very typical kind of Caesar record, but I think on the material side, you're spot on that observation.
Sure. Now, is that solely indicative of just where you guys are as guys, or is that partly in part due to the fact that you did add a new guitar player, which adds kind of a different energy?
I think it's a combination of the two. The thing is that you go in, and when you start writing a record, you try to stand back and be sort of objective and say, well, we need this kind of song or that kind of song to round out the record. And it was one of those things that just, everybody just kept coming in, hey, I got this new song idea, this new riff idea, this new chord change. And it just kind of took on a life of its own. And so I'd love to say that it was some sort of premeditated thing to come out with a more up-tempo, bouncy kind of a record. Mm-hmm. But it's just, this is the songs that were coming out of us at the time, and when we laid them all out as a body of work, that's just kind of wound up how it wound up being.
Sure. Now, Ron, you guys have always been a sort of a DIY type of a band. You know, you guys have very much, I mean, certainly in the early days you had the label and this and that, and now you're kind of doing probably a lot more of just whatever it is that you want to do. Do you find that easier now? Do you find it easier to write and to create without the label overlords telling you, okay, now write something that we can sell?
Yes, no doubt. And what's really nice about this record is, you know, we have a label now, Golden Robot Records, sure. And they're just absolutely great. They're based out of Australia, and they're looking to become more of a worldwide kind of force. And the timing was perfect as to when, you know, we had made this record. You know, the way that record labels and record business works now is the bands that are self-sufficient are really the only ones that are surviving or thriving. You know, the corporate infrastructure isn't there, the money's not there, the record sales aren't there. And so the bands that can write and produce themselves and curate themselves are the bands that are still out there and putting out, you know, sort of vibrant kind of music. Mm-hmm. And we've always been a very, you know, self-starting, you know, sort of, you know, generate all of this stuff on our own. And that for me was very liberating, especially coming from the, you know, you're going to be the next big thing on this big label with the Jimmy Iovines and the John Kolodners and all these big music business names,
sure,
which wound up just being more of a complication than it was a help. Mm-hmm. And so when we kind of got freed from all of that and we rose back up from the ashes, we made a promise that we would, if it wasn't really organic and it wasn't really natural and it didn't come easily, we just would move on, be it from songwriting to releasing a record. And so when we, you know, we're putting this record together, we've got a great producer who's got his own studio, we could be totally self-sufficient and just be judging our own music and judging our own process. And then we brought it to Golden Robot Records, and they're like, wow, this is a really exciting, great record. We'd love to be, you know, part of, now that you've created it, picking it up and helping people get to hear it. And we kind of stay out of their way, and they're really great at that. And so we do what we do, and they do what they do. And so with that wind up being the way that the record business now is, we're really grateful because it just keeps the music pure, it keeps the business side of it pure, and it keeps us just rolling down the road without it getting too complicated.
Sure. Now, Ron, let me ask you a question about the business the way it used to be and how it ended up becoming now. And what that is we talk to a ton of bands on the show, and from talking to them, you know, they all hate Amazon or Amazon Music or Google Play Music or Spotify or what have you, the streaming, because they don't get paid for their work. And that's a very fair assessment for the bands. But totally. I guess what my question is, though, is every one of you guys, your band included, signed these deals. Is it just a factor of there was never a thought that this kind of thing could happen with streaming music instead of a physical product, or why is it that every band didn't have protection?
Well, the problem with that is nobody knew where any of this stuff was going to go. Okay. And this was borne out by even the great minds when Napster, even when the CD came out, mm-hmm. that nobody really could project into the future what it was going to wind up meaning for the day-to-day business activities of trying to generate revenue so that this can keep rolling down the road for all these artists. So when, you know, technology now is kind of like the guys that are successful in technology, the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos, they're like the rock stars of the tech world.
Right.
So when they come out with these visionary platforms and concepts that trickle down in and has an effect on the music business, some people think it's positive, some people think it's negative. I think it's negative from a commercial standpoint for the bands. Mm-hmm. Excuse me as I get over my bronchitis. But from an exposure out of music in the hands of the consumer, just on a free art kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So nobody's been able to figure out yet where it's going and how to properly compensate the creators of the music.
Sure.
Because they can't figure out the nuts and bolts way to attach a fair and equitable remuneration for that piece of work. And so the problem is that you still have profit-generating entities like record companies and such that have figured out a way to protect their interests, but have never really figured out a way to let it trickle down to the artists. Sure. And that's been happening in the music business since some slick guy with a microphone sat an old dude down in front of a microphone and paid him 1/10 of what he's selling records. But, the issue is for me, it's a broader concept. What is it doing to music in general? Because not only is the commercial side of these things, there's the cultural and social side of the implications of this, which is music doesn't seem to be occupying the same social and cultural significance that it did in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and even in the 80s.
Sure.
Because, people can get it so easily, and it winds up becoming sort of disposable to them. Mm-hmm. And type in something, and a piece of music comes up. And I don't, for me, there was lifestyle and social and cultural things associated besides just the music. There's the bonding with your friends. There is the place that a piece of music occupies to answer life's questions for you. If you're some 12-year-old kid and you want to know why you're having these sexual desires and longings, you used to be able to listen to Robert Plant sing, "Squeeze my lemon till the juice runs down my leg,"
right.
And the kid would go, "I know exactly what he's talking about." Now you could type in that and get 50 porn sites of an actual woman doing something with a piece of fruit that previously your old kid, and it has demystified many things. And I think that over the whole broader picture has diluted the impact and the importance of music. And once you do that, there's a commercial side of that where it becomes disposable. People don't care if they only that they like, and they don't buy the whole album. Mm-hmm. And that has a sort of a trickle-down effect. But at the end of that, for the guys that are making it, they're having such a tough time trying to figure out where this is all going and what it means for their reality on a day-to-day basis, for them to just keep making their music and connecting to the people that relate to it, or to keep adding new people to the fan base, so to speak. And I think at the end of the day, it's so diluted and so widespread that no new movements start happening.
Sure.
To be able to sustain these fledgling or continuing artists. There's a lot of old-time guys that are out there complaining about how, guys like Gene Simmons, rock is dead. Mm-hmm. Well, Gene Simmons is a commerce-based guy, and he makes no...
Right.
It's the sales and the revenue stream of that. And I wouldn't argue with him. But I can play you 10 kids right now off of YouTube that are in a garage somewhere that, though it's unpolished and unslick, very and new thing of music. Is it going to be played on everyone's iPod? Probably not. But it certainly means that there's people out there who are inspired to make exciting new music. Mm-hmm. Is it all going to come together with a force behind it to become this thing that becomes known all around and therefore undeniable and therefore propagating and living and breathing like some of the great bands. Tell me who of any new band is filling an arena anymore.
Yeah,
It's the Rolling Stones. It was Tom Petty. And that's going away. Who's going to be our heroes that we go to listen in a big cathedral-like anthemic setting that's going to continue years from now?
Yeah.
Can't just be little guys in little theaters and little clubs. That can't sustain itself.
Right.
So who knows? And, for us, we're just grateful that we had enough of a fan base so that we can continue to do this. We stopped trying to make revenue off of this as a means of our main support system a long time ago. And it was the most liberating thing we ever did. We don't rely on this, so we can keep it pure. We can keep it, rolling down the road because it doesn't have to pay people's mortgages or keep them fed or raise their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I really have a tremendous amount of empathy for all my friends that do this for a living. It is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly frustrating. It requires them to be incredibly motivated, dedicated, and thorough in everything they do. And it detracts from their music because their attention span goes to those sort of things.
Sure.
And, I don't really know. Nobody really has the answers. There's a lot of, like the internet, there's a million people that will make a YouTube podcast about what they think is going to happen. Most of them don't have a clue.
Right.
And that's kind of a scary prospect if you're looking at this from a long-term perspective.
No doubt, man. Well, let's go backwards a little bit. This is just a question that I've never had the chance to ask you, but I've thought, and I think it's become more prevalent now than ever before. Not only Little Caesar, but a lot of the bands that were like your contemporaries, your specific style, I guess. And I'm not trying to compare you to these bands, but were the same musical. If you liked them, if you liked you would probably like these bands. I'm talking about bands like Junkyard or Four Horsemen or maybe Dangerous Toys. Those types of bands.
Yeah. Exactly.
In the 80s, those bands, it just seemed like those bands never got ahead, and it was always the slicker cash cow bands.
The pop bass. Yeah, the pop bass, highly produced, highly stylized, highly visual type of bands.
Right.
That were very friendly, that were pushed onto MTV,
mm-hmm.
that were selling records that the accountants remember. Back in the 80s, the record business was in a transition.
Sure.
It was getting ready to have quote unquote alternative thrust upon it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why I put the band together in the first place was I felt that music was becoming off track, that what was being magnified and what was being focused on was a departure from the music that I grew up with that was incredibly powerful for me. Not just stylistically, but also visually and everything else. What was emphasized? One of those things was guitar players that tried to impress you with their technical ability rather than to move you emotionally with the soul of their playing rather than their technical prowess. Eddie Van Halen kind of started that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was an MTV-based thing and we're starting to be run by accountants and lawyers, they started to look for bands that sounded just like the last successful band, mm-hmm. and not reaching out to bands like Little Caesar or Junkyard that you'd have to dig in a little bit deeper to hear the musical nuances because they didn't just visually plug right into what was the last video coming up on
Sure.
the hair metal show or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting. If I'm completely blunt, there's also the fact that a lot of those bands, like Little Caesar, Junkyard, we weren't singles-oriented bands.
Right.
You had to kind of buy into the whole lifestyle thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 80s, it wasn't the lifestyle thing anymore. It was more just who looks cute and who's going to be catchy and who's going to have the pyrotechnics and who's going to dazzle us with the guitar solo. But really, for people, unless you really followed it, Danger, and Dangerous Toys and Warrant, for most people, if you looked at them, they would think they were pretty much the same damn band.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think it's what brought up the whole Seattle and alternative thing. And I was telling Geffen Records this for years.
Sure.
Kids want an alternative. You can't just keep cramming the same rock track power ballad produced by the same five guys thing. It's going to get diluted and die. They didn't care. They were going to beat it until it was dead.
Right.
And sure enough, it killed that whole genre of music. And so bands, you know, that were more sleazier, you know, for us, we kept wanting to go play on the other side of town in Hollywood, where the motorcycle dudes were. We've got bands that had a little bit of punk rock, a little bit of southern rock, a little bit more authenticity.
Right.
And you know, we kind of, because we were from LA, we still to this day keep fighting that sort of label of, well, you're a hair metal band. We on satellite radio, we're on the Hair Nation channel, not on the Ozzy channel. And it's funny because we're the furthest thing from a hair pop metal kind of band that there is. But for me, I'm just glad they're playing us.
Sure.
But it was a very interesting time in music, and you know, we still have a very strong affinity for those bands personally and musically.
Sure.
Their work ethos, their value system. I mean, I put Little Caesar together as a statement of rebellion, mostly because I didn't look like a chick. I didn't want to dress like a chick. I didn't want to sing like a chick.
Right.
I wanted to be a dude.
Right.
I wanted to be a soulful, manly singer, looking manly, dressing manly, looking gritty, and being honest. And I'm not saying those other bands were dishonest, but they were more about appearance and looks than they were about the substance and sort of masculinity.
Right.
You
well,
know?
And let's face it, every one of those bands went away from the hairspray and makeup look the minute it wasn't cool anymore.
They had to, yeah.
You know,
they had to.
No doubt. Now, do you see? Let me explain this point, and then you tell me if you see this to be true or not. I see that those bands, yourself, or Horsemen, maybe Warrior Soul, you know, bands like that. Yeah. Now, you know, 30 however many years later, those bands still have credibility. You know, when people aren't shit talking them like they would Poison, and I'm not necessarily pointing at Poison. I'm just saying that's easiest target.
I get exactly what you're saying.
You know, where a lot of people now will be like, oh, how did you not know this Little Caesar record? Or how did you not have, you know, Nobody Said It Was Easy by the Four Horsemen? Those records, even though they may not have been the biggest records in 1987, they've held their, you know, their fan base all the way till now.
Yeah, no, the patina that and the aura that they cast winds up having more credibility sonically than when held up to a highly stylized piece of music that seems very out of context now.
Right.
When you listen to it retrospectively. And what that does for the bands, and we've been the beneficiaries, and I used to say this back in the day, people used to look at a band like us, we looked like a bunch of tattooed, axe-murdering biker dudes, and we're doing 3-part Motown covers, and people are going, wow, this is kind of weird. And I'm like, why is this weird? Rod Stewart and those guys were doing Motown stuff. Okay, musically, we have a little bit more of a roots-based approach to music. Now, I used to make jokes that, you know, we were dated in 1990.
Right.
In a classic rock approach, and fighting our record label to try to make a very sonically pure Skinner Bad Company type record. And so what's nice about that now is when you remove all of that very heavy visually and sonically, what you're left with is bands that are just very more pure based, you know, musically, wound up sounding a lot more contemporary or credible, because as time goes on, all of the great and classic bands had that in their thing. Just a good, warm guitar tone, emphasis on the hook of the song, not just what do they look like, how cute are they, what's the singer's hair look like, does it fit in with all the MTV videos? Because when all of that's stripped away, you know, when you listen to, and it's interesting because if you listen to Soundgarden, a lot of their early stuff sounded like Black Sabbath,
Sure.
you know? So in their own way, they were being a very rootsy-oriented band. So as time goes on, I totally agree that bands like us and Raging Slab and Junkyard and, you know, because punk rock has always stayed around, bands that have a little bit of that punk rock fuck you in their music, bands that didn't rely on giant snare drum sounds to impress you, but relied more on personal performances and personality in the music, whether you care for that personality or not, wind up hitting the ears being more credible than those other things that were incredibly stylized. And it's to the benefit of those bands. And they're still going, and they're still out there, and they have a much easier go of it than bands that had a hit record, you know, looking like a bunch of women, pretty women, and now they're 50 years old or 55 years old, and they got to go out there, and they don't look so pretty anymore.
Right.
And to their fans that are going out to get that experience, it's a much harder sell.
Right.
You know?
It is.
And it's, you know, again, this is the benefit of coming 25, 30 years after it and, you know, seeing what it winds up meaning. But one of the nice things about that is the more honest bands that rely purely on their personality and their sound are
no doubt, man. Well, Ron, obviously, as we said before, the new record is simply called 8. Tell us, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we pick a song, pick a song, maybe tell us a story about it, and then we'll wrap the interview up there. And also tell me, when is the record actually officially in stores?
The record is actually officially in stores, I think, in about 3 or 4 days. I think March 16th.
Okay, great.
So, you know, we're excited about that. And let's see, to pick a track, right off the top of my head, a track that I like, a track called Vegas.
Okay.
And basically, that is my little observational piece about where this selfie stick / Kardashianization of our culture is going, where basically everybody's looking to become a YouTube star and become famous out in social media, and what they're willing to do or where they're willing to move to try to find their place in the sun, and the hijinks that ensue.
Right. Nice. Well, let's check it out right now. This is brand new stuff from Little Caesar. The name of the tune is Vegas. It is from the album 8, and it is your classic metal show.